Going. All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Alden Robison, and thanks for watching this video presentation of research I've conducted as part of the completion of my thesis at California State University, Northridge. In this presentation, I'll be drawing on higher ed and writing center research, in addition to my own IRB-approved study, to consider the ways in which the Writing Center participates in maintaining systemic injustice. I'm also going to talk about what that might mean for how we can go about disrupting those systems, particularly by conceptualizing the Writing Center as a space for facilitating new channels for institutional communication. So, some important context for understanding how the Writing Center and institutional communication fit into perpetuating systemic injustice is the way the service fits into the overall management structure of higher education. As universities become more utilitarian and entrepreneurial, along with the development of the administrator role as we know it today, institutions have come to rely heavily on operationalized performance markers in order to articulate themselves to stakeholders and regulatory bodies. In her book, On Being Included, Sarah Ahmed uses language game philosophy to consider the extent to which institutional communication is strategic. This kind of strategic communication reduces down to an ecosystem that is totally wrapped up in generating a proliferating set of procedures and conventions for satisfying outcomes that are prepared in advance by those same procedures and conventions. These instruments are attuned for understanding and facilitating efficiency, and always in terms of notions of rightness that are overdetermined by the system in advance, since the system is what presents the tool in the first place. This is what I meant earlier when I referenced strategic communication. The kind of stuff that signals that things are running smoothly, but only because the signifiers are operationalized according to the needs of the system. This is how you get institutional diversity discourse that signals progressive change and accountability, but still further alienates marginalized individuals on campus. Ahmed calls these tools technologies. A non-exhaustive list of examples of these technologies in the Writing Center includes Standard American English, grades, and the kinds of programs and systems we use to schedule appointments, particularly when those appointments involve tracking and penalizing students for things like no-shows. These are all examples of tools that might have their authentic uses, but come into their own as means for satisfying the operational needs of the system in ways that can really work against students, faculty, and staff in marginalized groups. Standard American English in particular is an important example. Candace Bond, synthesizing contributions from Grimm, Denny, and Rowan with research on first-generation college students, argues that conventionalized Standard American English works as a tool for silencing minority students with different literacies. This approach is oftentimes justified in writing centers and composition classrooms as necessities, where students have to be taught the rules of the game. This is exactly how Standard American English becomes a strategic tool for the needs of the system. This is evident in my own study, in which students from across the country, reached via snowball sampling on writing program administration listservs and professional groups, were asked to reflect on their perspectives on writing, their coursework, and their campuses in terms of their experiences with the Writing Center. Students largely reported that they felt that the Writing Center amplified given understandings of good writing by occupying a support position. So, students in English generally saw the Writing Center as process-oriented and transformative, but the overwhelming majority in first-year composition and writing-intensive general education classes came away from their sessions with a firmer sense that good writing is encapsulated in good grammar or conventions. Many mirrored the sentiment that the Writing Center is there to correct mistakes, with the mistakes usually being described in terms of grammar and Standard American English. This played out in student responses to the question of what, in their perspective, constitutes good writing. For many, the key component of good writing was the extent to which it was consistent with those same Standard American English conventions. This amplifying effect might be facilitated by the way students come to use the Writing Center in the first place. This pie chart shows that 27.85% of respondents first used the center to satisfy assignment requirements. 34.18% were recommended by their professors, 11.39% found the service through outreach and advertisement, and 6.33% were recommended the service by peers. That 20.25% slice labeled Other is made up of students who described seeking out the service as part of their own desire to improve on some aspect of writing or academic performance. For a majority of student respondents, reasons for use of the Writing Center are heavily tied to classroom power dynamics and assignments. It isn't surprising then that respondents tend to value short-term proofreading work and proper conventions in their evaluations of sessions. Responses to the student and administrator surveys also suggest that the Writing Center's primary spheres of influence are first-year composition and lower division general ed classes. This chart shows that 37.21% of respondents were freshmen, 20.93% were sophomores, 16.28% were juniors, and graduates and seniors matched each other at 12.79% each. Keeping in mind that this study doesn't paint a representative picture of students who use writing centers, but is rather the activation of existing professional communication channels, these results might suggest that students most within reach of writing center administrators are in first-year composition or early writing-intensive classes, likely because of connections with English departments. All 36 of the writing center administrators that responded had degrees in English or writing instruction. This is all to say that the primary direction for writing center communication seems to be English and first-year composition, and this comes about for students in a way that seems to reinscribe and recenter performance markers that are operationalized by the larger scaffold of systemic power practices. However, while respondents suggested that writing center services did seem to reinscribe discipline-specific and closed conceptions of writing and language, many respondents suggested that the writing center changed the ways in which they interacted with other campus entities. This pie chart illustrates that 43.64% of students reported being more likely to use other campus resources after having used the writing center, while 54.55% reported no change, and 1.82% indicated that they were less likely to use the writing center. When asked to elaborate, students explained that they felt more confident in themselves and campus services, and this confidence and understanding enabled them to insert themselves into campus spaces that may have been unavailable to them before. Together, these findings point to a space that many students see as actively involved in facilitating new ways of engaging with the campus community, even when there is, and perhaps even because there is, the perception of the Writing Center as a passive support service. Since students come across the Writing Center early in their academic careers, many reported that it was the first campus resource that they felt they had used. It can play an important role in facilitating subsequent interactions with other parts of campus. Since so many students articulated the Writing Center as serving an important role in their sense of campus belonging and the development of their identities as students, I think it's critical to really diversify the center itself. This should involve the diversification of search committees and intentional outreach directed at students and potential hires that might not be within easy reach of the Writing Center already for systemic reasons. Additionally, practices like cluster hiring can help cultivate a sense of belonging for individuals working in and using the center. Diversifying the center in these ways will have to involve cross-campus coalition building, and this is where the DESO-oriented institutional communication really comes into full force. Diversity and belonging can become a shared goal that bridges organizational structures and breaks out of the silos that come out of the kinds of management practices I discussed at the beginning of this presentation. Hiring diverse students from a range of ethnic, racial, gendered, and also academic and disciplinary backgrounds and interests can become one way of doing this, so that representation within the center becomes a way of bringing areas across campus in conversation with one another. This should put students, faculty, and staff in positions to engage in the kind of advocacy and authentic communication that is actually transformative and resists reduction by performance markers. While those markers will certainly persist, they might begin to take on a different shape. They might become blockages or reasons to speak, rather than mechanisms for efficiency that smooth over and take the place of that speech. In this way, the Writing Center can position itself as a meeting ground, where students, faculty, and staff alike are challenged to think differently about how they navigate academic and social spaces. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I'm excited to chat at the roundtable.